as we get older, there aren't as many role models for women. A lot of women I hear say, oh, I'm Yeondan or I'm Sandan, that's good enough. They don't have the ambition to go up higher because I think they don't see those role models. They don't see other women doing it. They don't think it's possible. And that's something I do feel it as I get older. You sort of see those communications and the interaction with other people, and you realize that, yeah, the world's not necessarily open to everything and everyone. And I'd love to be that person that sort of helps people to see those opportunities for themselves. There's a caretaker at the rec center, and she says you have to make sure that on your way home from practice that you give them some space and you give them that time to digest what they've just gone through. The kids need some time to sort of calm their minds and digest.
Hey guys, welcome to another episode of the Tokushikai Inside Look podcast. Unfortunately, my microphone wasn't working so well during this interview, so if you have any problems, I apologize for any inconvenience. Today we're speaking with Makiko Ara from Vancouver, Canada. Makiko has been training for over 30 years, during which time she's participated in several world championships as member of the national team. Makiko holds the rank of Renshi Rokudan and is a director and VP West of the Canadian Kendo Federation. In today's conversation, we talk about her experiences growing up in Kendo and developing into a leader and role model for girls and women in the sport. Her dedication to the next generation of practitioners has helped make the Renbu Kendo Club a beacon for young kenshi across Canada. It is my pleasure to present to you Makiko Ara.
My name is Makiko Ara, and I am in Vancouver, British Columbia, Canada. And I am a 6th Dan Renshi in Kendo. And I've been doing Kendo for 32 years, I think the last time I calculated. My journey of starting Kendo, I suppose, is pretty straightforward. So my father was a Kendo instructor. We had immigrated from Japan in 1980. And since then, he had joined the Vancouver Kendo Club, which was the main Kendo club here in Vancouver. So it's got a pretty long history. He was an instructor there and eventually became the head instructor and president of the club as well. So I think Kendo has been a part of my life since I was very young, and I've sort of been exposed to Kendo all my life. In terms of when I started is, I guess, kind of a mystery to a lot of people. I actually started when I was about 12 years old. So typical history of these Kendo children is that they start when they're like 5 or 3 years old. But mine was a little bit of a different case. From what I understand, when I was a lot younger, I hated Kendo. So I didn't like the idea of it. My dad used to take myself and my older sister to the Kendo club, and we both just had no interest in it. I think a lot of it had to do with the fact that there weren't any girls. We're 3 siblings, we're all girls. And so I think it was a little bit difficult for us to sort of imagine what starting Kendo would be like. There weren't any other girls. There weren't a lot of smaller kids at the time too. And so we resisted, and I think we sort of participated off and on when we were young, but not much. And then when I was about 12 years old, just getting ready to go into high school, my dad said to me that if I didn't start now, that he wouldn't let me do Kendo ever. And so it was sort of an ultimatum and probably a little bit of reverse psychology. But I thought, well, if I can't ever do Kendo, that's no good. And so I decided then that I would begin to do it seriously. And yeah, that's sort of when my journey began.
You said you had siblings as well. Did you all start together? That made it like at least a group of kids that could...
No, so my older sister, she's just 2 years older than me, but even when we were younger, we were like the same height by the time we were, 10 years old, and I was really into sports and she wasn't. So I think I was sort of handpicked by my father to be the Kendo daughter. My younger sister, who's quite a bit younger than me, she's 7 years younger than me. So she did start when she was young. So she must have probably been about 6 or 7 when she started. So a few years after that. And yeah, she continued Kendo into her adulthood. But these days she doesn't do it.
Oh, so you're a middle child.
Yes.
Yeah, I hear a lot about middle childs needing to prove something for themselves. Did that drive your motivation in doing Kendo, at least doing it well?
Yeah, I think so. I think Kendo was a way for me to find a place in the family. Like everyone needs something, and Kendo was my thing. It allowed me to have a really strong relationship with my father as well, which was really valuable. Got to spend a lot of time with him, just going back and forth to the dojo, Kendo trips and things like that. So that was a really valuable, life relationship that I had with my father, I think.
Okay, so starting kendo was a big thing, like just before high school. When was the next thing that you could remember about your early days in kendo?
Yeah, I would say that because starting at 12, it's like sort of when that competition age, begins for a lot of young kenshi. So through the high school years, I was very focused on competition. I practiced a lot. I remember going to different dojos throughout the week, practicing 5 or 6 times a week, with my father taking me to different dojos and then our regular practice as well. Now, that I would say that time was sort of a blur because you're just sort of following along what my father was instructing me and to taking me. But I think a big thing was, and it's probably similar to a lot of experiences of other kenshi in Canada, but I guess being on Team Canada was probably a big turning point where kendo is still an individual sport, but it becomes very much a team thing. And now there's a lot of investment and time that goes into you as an athlete. And there's a sort of an added pressure of producing and being successful for your country. So I think that was a big jump. I was in my early 20s when I went to my first World Championships. I mean, it was an eye-opening experience just in itself, knowing that there were so many people around the world who did kendo and the level of kendo that was there. But for sure, it sort of, to think, was a turning point in terms of making me understand what that whole competitive world was.
Did you have much knowledge of what Team Canada was and what the World Championships involved before joining the team? And then what was that process like that first time getting into it?
Yeah, the first time that was in 1997. Yeah. So I was in university. At the time, I mean, I knew a lot of people who were on Team Canada. There wasn't an actual official women's division until 1997. So there used to be several categories that were called goodwill matches. And so Canada would send like a few junior players and a few women, and then there would sort of be a sort of a tournament aside from the main men's tournament. So I knew a lot of players that were on the men's team. Definitely at Vancouver Kendo Club, there were very strong players, and then also locally at like Houston, lots of strong players that were going to the World Championships. But yeah, no idea what the whole tournament was like because, back then there was no YouTube or, you couldn't actually see a lot of these matches. And then also the whole experience of training for it was actually quite different back then. The expectation, I think, before 2000 was that individuals just trained themselves and then they were selected based on experience and their results from local tournaments. And then they would just fly them to the tournament. And it was sort of like there was no real team aspect to it. Yeah. So 1997, it was the same. Like I was just a university student, just training on my own. And then we went to the tournament. And then 2000 was the first time that there was actually like a training camp and process that was involved.
So when you were doing university and just after graduation, looking for a job and all that, did that interrupt how you approached your kendo practice? How did you balance those two things?
Yeah, I mean, during my university years, I couldn't practice as much, right? Like, I'm sure everyone can relate that you're just so busy with your school and, it's sort of that semester system. And sure, in the summertime, you have a little bit more time. So I would say back then, yeah, during university, I probably only practiced 2 or 3 times a week and probably didn't have much time for additional training. As the years went on, when I was working, I had a 9 to 5 job. So, getting to kendo practice was fairly easy. And then being able to train specifically for the World Championships There were challenges, of course, but I think the only area that gets sort of neglected is your social life. I think we make time for work because we have to live, and then we make time for kendo because that's just what we do. But it's sort of like that social aspect of going out on Friday nights or going to that party on Saturday that gets neglected when you're training.
And throughout this time, your whole family was still involved in the whole Kendo community?
Yeah, basically, my father continued teaching at Vancouver Kendo Club. He passed away 10 years ago, but up until, I mean, he passed away from leukemia, so he was sick for about 10 years previous to that as well. So I sort of had to take over the club at a certain point, and that was actually a challenge for me. Actually, now that I think of it, before you're just in the position of learning and sort of accepting and taking, which is the pathway of martial arts, where you want to absorb as much as you can and you don't question much and you are the student very much. I think that I was lucky to have that mentor that was very close to me, but when he got sick, and then I would have been in my mid-20s. He asked me to take over instructing the club, and of course everything that goes with it, right? Like, we ran an annual tournament, a fairly large tournament here in Vancouver, so organizing that and sort of being in the background to make sure that things happen. So I think that was a big bit of a shock, and I remember having some conversations with my family, like, okay, this is too much, or sort of that frustration that early 20s have, right?
What was it that was too much? Is the time, the effort, the hassles, the conversations you needed to have?
Yeah, if I think about it, I mean, certainly the time, like having to, take away from, again, like personal things, or the stresses of, having to go to work and all that kind of thing combined with that. I think, though, that if I really think about it, it was the difficulty of managing relationships. I think now I feel like I think one of the other questions that you had brought up in the list was, what value has Kendo brought to your life? And I think one of the huge values that Kendo has brought, and I can reflect back now and think about, is that you have an opportunity to have ongoing, long relationships with a lot of people. There's those people that are adults that come into the club and are brand new to Kendo, and so they're sort of already adults, and then you're introducing them to something new and sort of bringing them into the community. There's people that have been around forever, that are lifers, that started when they were very young, and you need to motivate them to continue doing Kendo. There's people who are very ambitious about where they want to go with Kendo, people who are not so much. And there's parents, there's kids. You just have an opportunity to have a relationship with all of these people for a longer duration of time, not just something like school where the next year you just might not be around these people anymore. And so I think that has brought a lot of value in terms of, I guess, life experience that I have now. But back then, having to deal with all of these things was kind of a burden, right? As a 20-year-old, how do I talk to a parent whose kid is not coming to practice? Who am I to say that they should be coming out? There was other instructors there that were higher ranked than me, and who was I to say that who's going to run which practices or what events we're going to have? So I think those were the challenges and frustrations that I had at the time.
You brought up a lot of different archetypes in a dojo, so it would be great if you could give a specific example to see what was that situation like and how did you manage it?
I mean, I think it's fairly obvious, but I'll sort of approach it at a different angle. I think it is other instructors. So at the time, I mean, I didn't know anything, right? Like, I'm just there. I felt like more as an administrator, but it also felt like I had to sort of, assert myself and make sure that, I complete my role. But that part of it at that time, 20 years ago, I don't think I can say much about it. But I think now, though, I'm not the head instructor at our current club at Renbu Dojo. My husband is. But we have a breadth of instructors that it's very deep. So we have several instructors that have been on Team Canada. We have other younger instructors that are coming up. Looking at it now, I think it's so valuable for instructors or leaders of a dojo to be a team. right? It is, after all, just a hobby, and we all don't have to be there. And probably people that are at the instructor level, they're probably don't have huge goals in terms of, like going for Team Canada or yes, absolutely. Most of our instructors are still grading for rank, and that's something very important that we stress in our club, that everyone, even up to the oldest instructor, should still be trying to achieve some sort of a goal so that you grow, because a big part of Kendo is to grow and continue learning. So I think that part of it, of having a strong team as instructors and leaders of the club, is something that's very important, and something that I think it's always a struggle, right? Because those type of people are also strong-willed, strong personalities, and to be able to bring those type of people together is very important and difficult, and I think probably a challenge for a lot of clubs as well.
What are some of the things you guys have done to make it work?
One thing is giving people autonomy, roles and autonomy, I think is a huge thing. And it's probably true for business too, right? You can have someone in a VP role, but if you don't give them autonomy, then they don't feel that this is their own thing. The other thing is giving them roles. So, not just saying, hey, you're a leader and sort of do what leaders do, giving them specific roles. And I think if you give people specific roles and duties, then they'll shine, because these people inherently are leaders and strong people. And so I think those two things are the most important.
What are examples of that in a Kendo dojo, just to differentiate these terms from the business and the organizational sense?
Sure, yeah. I think in terms of roles, if I think very specifically to the Kendo dojo, it would be like if you are responsible for a certain subset or group of students, right? If you're responsible for the junior students, then that we very much make it that instructor is responsible for them for a period of time. Often that is a finite period of time, so that people don't feel like they're just pigeonholed into a certain group. And also observing how they're doing in that group, I think is really important. And so giving them a specific group of students to take care of, or a specific event. I mean, that's often a thing that comes up, right? Where either the club is getting prepared to go to a certain larger tournament, or we're hosting an event, things like that. Ongoing events that we have, there's almost always one person who's responsible for them, and then they have the autonomy to ask for help from anyone else, and it could be the other instructors or other parents or other members of the club. In terms of autonomy, I think that is actually probably the hardest part, and I think that goes back to the type of people we're dealing with, right? Like, these people have a lot of pride. A lot of them are very ambitious and strong-minded. I think if you try to micromanage, or you try to be too, I guess, overbearing might be another word, give too much advice, it's not fun, right? Like, it's no longer your thing. And so I think once you identify that these are the people that you trust, and that these are the people that are going to help you be successful, then you have to give them that freedom to do it.
Could you describe a little more ambitions in Kendo?
Yeah, I think ambitions in Kendo goes back to some of those life stages in Kendo. So when you're very much a student, whether you're a beginner adult or you've been doing it since you're a child, I think you just learn, and there's not much ambition, or you don't even know what really the end looks like. You're just doing it head down. And I think that's actually a really valuable life experience too, right? To be new to something and just be completely head down and accept any information that you receive, any direction that you get. I think then, though, as you move up, the obvious one for Kendo is competition, right? So whether you are being competitive locally, and that's sort of your goal, and certainly there are people that don't have ambitions to be on Team Canada or the best in Canada or the world. They just want to be successful in the local tournaments and have success there. And I think that's absolutely, I think there's tons of value in that. So there's the competition sort of stage and ambition there. And then I think after that, it becomes like Kendo fortunately has rank as you go up, and it's similar to Iaido, that the ranks, you can't just get a black belt and, just be finished with it, like a lot of the martial arts. So there's always that top goal, which is to get hachidan, that you can always work towards. And then I think also within your progress, if you do have the opportunity, it is to sort of move into that instructor role, right? At first, you might just be sort of more of a coach or a support person, but moving into becoming an instructor, being responsible for the development of some students, and then hopefully being able to lead a club is perhaps like another ambition of a lot of people.
You could see that progression starts from being just yourself. And then when you're competing with others. When you're ranked, you start to have peers that you're on the same level as. And then when you're an instructor, you really have to be working with people either above you, same rank, or your students. So that seems like a huge jump, going from just caring about yourself and your own practice to this whole other world, being responsible for others and having more accountability to the higher ranks. Could you talk a bit about that transition from focusing on yourself to having others involved?
I mean, that's sort of maturing, right? Like life. I think even when you're young and learning, you could be a lot more effective, or perhaps it could be more enriching if you thought about others as well. But I think when we're young or just learning, we don't have that opportunity, right? Like we're just getting by kind of thing. So I think that it's sort of the nature of growing up and maturing. And fortunately, like in the kendo world, it is a sport where you can sort of start when you're older. And so that sort of, what we talked about, those stages of development could happen when you're like in your 20s, or it could happen when you're in your 40s, or it could happen when, you're much younger and you have that time as a young person to go through that. I think definitely it happens in other sports, but I feel like because kendo, there's no off season. That's what I think that's the big difference between kendo and other sports. There's no off season. Well, technically, some dojos, might take a month off in the summer, but basically it's like something that once you start, there's no end. It's not like, at the end of fall, you get to take 6 months off and then come back in the springtime and decide, like, am I going to play basketball this year again? Or am I going to join the tennis club again? There really is no pause where it's like, well, maybe some students won't come back. It's just goes on. It just never ends, which sounds terrible actually. But I think that is where it's that progress of where you're in it for the long haul. And even for people that just started, there's almost no question that, are you going to come back next year? It's once they're in that community where they see that these people are in it as a life goal and as a life study, that they too feel like they've joined this sort of almost like a cult where they can never leave. So I think that it just gives you an opportunity to have those growth as a person through kendo.
You mentioned in the CKF summer seminar that there comes a time where you have this identity crisis. And when that happens, for some reason, something prevents you from seeing that journey continuing for yourself. Could you maybe talk about your own times where you had this identity crisis, and then how did you get over that hump?
Sure. Yeah, I can talk about myself, but I can also, let me talk about a little bit, because it didn't happen to me, but I think it does happen to a lot of young people. And I think maybe specifically more women, and I'll jump into that as well. I think a lot of athletes, so sort of that beginning stage when you're just doing kendo at your dojo and you're sort of competing locally, but not going out beyond that. I think when players make that jump to committing to trying out for Team Canada, or they want to go to nationals, things like that, sort of getting into that larger arena, I think a lot of people think, oh, I'm not good enough, right? That's often a thing that I hear, like, well, I want to try out for Team Canada, but I'm not sure if I'm good enough. To that, I say, like, if you're not good enough, then they just won't pick you, right? Like, you just won't get picked, but at least you tried. Like, if you don't try, then you'll never be able to say that you got in or you didn't get in. But I think a lot of people have that, where they question whether they're good enough to move to the next level. Maybe even locally, like, I hear some of our clubs, juniors, like we do go down to Seattle for tournaments, and then the parents will say, well, it's not really good enough. Like, it's okay. They don't need to go, right? And I say, well, of course, the experience of being in tournaments, like you're not going to become good at being good at tournaments from the first day. So the more experience you get, obviously, the better. And then for the kids, a lot of it is that sort of camaraderie, right? When you go on those trips or have those experiences of being on a team together, I mean, that's the value in friendship that I think is really valuable in any sport. So I encourage that very much. Now, when we get into I was talking, I think, on my presentation at the summer seminar about, I think, our roles as we get older. There aren't as many role models for women, I think, in some of the higher positions that we talk about, like being a coach or an instructor or head of a club or even higher rank. A lot of women I hear say, oh, I'm Yondan or I'm Sandan, that's good enough. They don't have the ambition to go up higher because I think they don't see those role models. They don't see other women doing it. They don't think it's possible. And so to that, I think that's where people feel like that perhaps they're not good enough, or that role doesn't exist for them. And that's something I think I've never felt as a younger person, but I do feel it as I get older. And I think it's probably because when I was younger, I just didn't notice or didn't care if someone thought I wasn't good enough or that I shouldn't be doing what I'm doing. But as you get older, you sort of see those communications and the interaction with other people, and you realize that, the world's not necessarily open to everything and everyone. And so I'm a fairly positive person, so I don't get too dragged down by that, and I move forward and persevere and go for what I want. But I think a lot of people don't have that strength to do it. And I'd love to be that person that sort of helps people to see those opportunities for themselves, because you can't really push people, but then to be able to give them those opportunities, open the paths, and allow them to be successful in what they want to do.
So that is a very interesting concept of having the strength to either persevere or push through. And we know that, especially in a community like this, where in a Japanese martial art is very hierarchical too. So you can't really push through. You have to find ways of blending in and then eventually start creating better influence. But what would you say to like someone that has been very successful as an athlete, and they see that, okay, now I can put at least a little impression on the community or at my local level or at my dojo. I have things that I can share, that I can teach, but I don't have the welcome from current seniors or instructors. What would you recommend to these people that have something valuable to share and feel like they need to do it now, but don't have the patience, or in your case, you're talking about having some kind of strength or to go through it?
Yeah, I totally understand what you're saying, and I see that a lot. Kendo is very hierarchical. As long as there's someone above you, you really shouldn't be going above that person. I think surrounding yourself with people that support you, I think, is really important to keep yourself positive, right? So even if there's barriers, not getting too isolated in that situation, I think, is really important. And when I say surround yourself, doesn't mean that, it's like they have to be with you all the time, right? It can be people from other clubs. It can be people not from the Kendo world. But people that support you and are behind you, I think, and having a few people that you can talk to once in a while about the situation and get some perspective, I think, is really important. And I think I've been very lucky because I have had people that I can lean on and who support me throughout my life. So it's perhaps easier for me to say those things. But I think the other thing is that I don't want to say that I'm like successful. I don't feel like, I've had a ton of success in Kendo or even that process I've gone through in Kendo, but I think I'm happy with it, right? Like I'm in a situation where I'm happy with where I am right now, and I'm doing things that I want to do, and I've been able to do those things. Now, if you ask me how that was, possible, something that you just asked in the question was, how does one make it possible? I think it is a lot of hard work, right? Like earlier on, like, and through your life, you have to sort of do things that are hard, that not everyone is willing to do. And if you do those things, then they're like, wow, you can really count on this person, or wow, they made this happen. And that sort of separates you from the others, right? The people who just say things, and we all know those people, right? So I think you do have to put in the work. You have to show that you can do things. You have to show that you can take on responsibilities, and just human nature, right? Like, we are not willing to just give the stage or the voice to anyone. A lot of people, especially the older people, they want to see that you're capable and you're able. And that might not necessarily be just because you're strong at Kendo, right? They want to see that you're sort of a responsible person, and that you'll take whatever role that they give you with the required seriousness that is needed.
So for people that have been involved in organizations that have had to work their way up this type of hierarchy, it's very simple to understand the need to not only do things for yourself, but help others achieve things. So you have to work hard to help others, and then they will bring you up. It's not you pushing yourself up. Like, you need others to help pull you up. But in martial arts especially, the rank says a lot about where you can have your authority, but the rank mostly comes from your skill in the art. So how do you balance that? And how would you explain that to a student that just sees that, okay, once you get this rank, you have all say, but there's still all this other hard work you have to do?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. I mean, with Kendo, there is that rank part of it. But I think from a leadership and administrative sort of role, unless you're in a club that's has a very sort of strong head, that's maybe not willing to waver and give up the baton per se, I would hope that even if you're lower rank, and I would again say that if you expect to receive some responsibility within a club, that you have to still show something. You have to have shown that you are able and you're capable, and all those things that we talked about before about managing relationships and things like that. So absolutely, if someone is, say, Sandan or Yondan and they're 22 years old, we're probably not going to give them the same responsibilities in that stage as to maybe someone who's 50 who joined 2 years ago and has IQ. That person probably has a lot more value to give in terms of running a club or running an event or managing the peoples within the club than that 22-year-old. So I think there is that. I believe that rank is important in terms of being a coach or actually teaching the class. But other things, there's so much work to be done within a dojo or a federation or for a tournament that I would question if those sort of communities where you absolutely have to be a certain rank to have any sort of a role within that club.
Do you have someone in mind, or archetype of someone that has a lot of life experience, management experience, and comes in as a low rank, but then you've given them some responsibility and it's obvious why you should have done that?
Yeah, absolutely. Like in our club, we have a student, although I mean, he's been around for quite a while now, but he started Kendo when he retired. So he was probably 60. He had a government job. So yeah, I'm sure he was probably 60 when he started. He's in his 70s now, but within our club, he's an MVP, right? 10 years ago, when most of us were having kids and we're super busy with work and things like that, he was there to take on little things that needed to be happening around the club. And he's a great face for our club. And I think he's only like, I think he just passed Sandan a couple of years ago. So even when he was doing a lot of things for our club, he was just Shodan or Nidan. But he's just a great anchor to have in our club. And we're really lucky to have him because there's sort of an age gap. We don't have people like in their 50s or 60s in our club. It's sort of like people in our 40s. And then we have one student who's in his 70s, and sort of, yeah, he's definitely provides that anchor for us and represents us well if we ask him to go out into the Kendo community. He's our representative for the local federation and things like that. And I think, yeah, just from his life experience, we know that he's going to make the right decisions and represent us well.
So let's go from the oldest member of your club to the young people coming up. I know that your club is really strong and encouraging kids, like young kids, to be involved and not just think about the practice, but also having fun. And then you also host people at your house that are traveling and want to train. Could you talk about
Mhm.
that a little bit, about nurturing that next generation, and how do you work with kids to make sure that this community continues past your generation?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I love working with kids. Even when I was younger, I always loved teaching the kids groups more than, teaching other adults. I think in our club, it's not always been the case. I look back to probably about 7 or 8 years ago at our club when we only had 3 junior students. So one of our old members had come back. She had taken some time off for her career and to have kids. And then so she had come back with her son, who was probably 7 or 8 at the time. And then we had another family that had a young boy. And so there's just 3 of them, and their parents were very passionate. They brought them to practice every week. But then we realized that we weren't really offering something special for those kids. We were just sort of throwing them in with the adult practice and modifying as we went along, kind of thing. But at that time, we just decided, like, we actually had a conversation as instructors, groups of instructors had a conversation that we need to grow the juniors, or else we're never going to increase in number within our dojo. But then also, like, what's going to happen in 20 years, kind of, that conversation. So we allotted times within the 2 or 3 hours that we had at the gym. We would have like the first hour that's specifically for juniors, or we would have specific instructors for juniors and different events within the dojo just for juniors. So that has sort of progressed, and it is literally in less than 10 years, because I remember my son was probably a year old when this was all happening. So it's like 6 or 7 years. Once I think you start committing to that, sure, you still need to have people come to your dojo to want to start. But I think even for those people that come by and they see that there's a program for kids, it makes it much easier for them to join. And then also word of mouth is always a big thing, right? Like one family telling another family that this is a great program, and that has brought in a huge number of students. I would say that the majority is through word of mouth, because really, like, not a lot of people seek kendo, I think, or even know what it is. So I think that's been the big change, that we committed to it. And I've told a lot of people, a lot of people have asked us how we've grown our junior program, but I think it's a commitment that, hey, our club is committed to growing junior kendo, and these are the things we're doing, and doing those things, and people will come. With respect to having kenshi who come and train with us, I think that started in 2008 or 2009, just ahead of the World Championships in Brazil. So Mansan Ma from the Etobicoke Kendo Club, she was on the team. My husband was the coach at the time, and she was struggling. She was having a hard time with the training. And in Toronto, you could live in one area of Toronto. It takes you like 2 hours to get to your practice by train, right? Like that's the reality. That's kind of like bizarre to us here in Vancouver, because everyone just drives and everything is within 20 or 30 minutes, right? But it's a real struggle. And then you start work, and then it's like, or you go to university. She was going to, oh no, she's going to kill me. Where did she go? She went to Guelph? No, somewhere. She went somewhere to university, was not in town. So then that added another layer of having to travel home on the weekends and all this stuff. And other things as well, right? Just struggling with the training. So then she asked us if she could come out for the summer. So then she stayed with us during, I think, 3 months in the summertime. And that was sort of the start of people come knocking on our door and staying with us. I think that relationship that we continue to have with Mansan, it's been really valuable to us. I mean, at the time, I guess we, as a family, we were youngish, and having that sort of vibrant young person who's just so eager and so ambitious, as we've talked about a lot about, is like a gift for us too, right? We are no longer in that position where we're sort of mindlessly going after this Team Canada goal. Certainly we were in that position at some time in our life, but to be around those people, I think it just makes us younger, and also reminds us of the passion. And if we can make people's lives a little bit easier to get to that goal, that's great for us. That's, value to us as well. Yeah, so through the years, we've had a lot of people like Kyle Lee from Chinook Kendo Club, Kylie Sensei now, is when he was training for the previous World Championships, because he lives in Calgary and doesn't have many people to practice with. So he used to come out every other weekend, fly out on Friday after work, and then practice Saturday, Sunday with us, and then fly home. So again, we've had a very long relationship with him too. It's great to see, someone like that who's, was a purely, just an athlete trying to train. And then now he's running his club in Chinook, and he's had a ton of success. And yeah, we're so privileged to be part of that experience with him.
So I imagine this homestay is more than a couple of days, it's like weeks.
It depends. Yeah, sometimes we have people that we've had commonly people who are on their way to Japan, and they will like literally just stay with us for a night or two and maybe try to get a practice in. But yeah, months, ongoing, like Kyle. And then certainly we've had a lot of Team Canada people stay with us for like maybe 2 weeks to get 5 or 6 training sessions in before they go back. So yeah, it depends, but we have sort of an open door policy. There was one athlete from Calgary, not Kyle, but she used to come quite often to stay with us. And then on Friday afternoon, I'd hear a knock on the door, and I'd answer the door, and I'd be like, "Oh, what are you doing here?" And she'd be like, "Oh, Dean didn't tell you." Like, come on in. So yeah, it's pretty much an open door. And then yeah, if there's a tournament in town, things like that, we'll often have 2 or 3 people stay with us. Yeah.
If you're a tourism agency, how would you, what does a day look like in a homestay with the Aras, and what does the week look like? What does a month look like?
Well, if you ask Mansan, I'm a bit of a tyrant when it comes to certain things about etiquette and things like that. So you're going to get a bit of a Japanese mom's perspective on being a child in our family. And then, of course, there are high expectations, especially for students that are staying for longer, that they work on their own to improve. Because most of the time when they come here, they're not working or they're not going to school. Any learnings that they get in the dojo or over dinner or over drinks, they should be training in the backyard or on our driveway doing things. So that is an expectation. Other than that, in terms of the dojo practices, we often try to set up some extra practices when people are here for shorter length of time, or try to get some people to come as additional practice for them. And it's not a guarantee. So I can't guarantee that. But we do try to spend as much time in the dojo, because after all, that's what they're here for. And I think that's the value that they get, the one-on-one time, and then also the additional, different people to practice with, because I think that's really important as well. Practices here for Team Canada can be pretty long. An average practice is probably 3 or 4 hours. Sometimes we go 5 or 6. They are long days. So there's a lot of recovery that needs to be done as well. So when we get home, we let the kenshi do what they need to do in terms of resting. I feed them a lot. And that's an important thing for me too, to make sure that they're well fed and with good nutrition. So we have lots of good meals together, and absolutely I think the conversations that we have in the evenings is hopefully provides value, but certainly is fun for us too, to hear people's kendo stories. It's sort of like a podcast in our basement where you get to ask questions and find out about different perspectives and lives in kendo.
Actually, it's funny you said that, because this is how I describe the podcast to people that I want to interview. It's just pretend we're just sitting alone in the hotel room or something after a seminar or after a long day of practice. They're the kind of conversations we want to have.
Yeah, for sure.
One thing I want to talk about was, based on what you just talked about and also what you had shown us in the summer seminar, was you've taken a more modern approach to thinking about helping people be strong. Just like in the olden days where you have track and field or even basketball and whatever, it's just like, just go out there, play the game, and then go to practice, and that's it. And now there's a better understanding of how to maintain health through diet, through exercise, through recovery and maintenance and all that stuff. Could you talk about some of these adapted things that you've brought in that have helped either prevent injury or increase longevity or improve strength and conditioning, some of those stuff?
Absolutely. So strength training and health is critical for athletes, not just in kendo, but for any sport. The science is sort of catching up a little bit in the kendo community. I think we were slow to adopt some of those readily accepted strategies for training. Kendo has been a little bit slow. It's historically a very traditional sport, and I think that's where it comes from. I would say for me, or I wish I knew then what I know now in terms of training. So when I was actually an athlete, I think put my body through a lot of strain. There's a lot of times where I was practicing or competing under a lot of pain and just managing the pain and managing, like, I hope I don't actually injure myself, right? At least this is just pain, but you never want to have that catastrophic injury. I was lucky enough not to. And the most common one in kendo is obviously tearing your Achilles, but certainly through my 20s and even into my 30s, I was constantly taping up my Achilles and getting all sorts of treatments, acupuncture and chiro and physio, just to try to manage that. But that being said, I think I wasn't doing enough to help myself. And so those are the things that I hope that I bet even if I had told myself when I was 20, I probably wouldn't have listened. That if I say it enough and we sort of make it part of the routine and make it part of Team Canada training, the recovery aspect and the training aspect, that hopefully these younger people that are in the position now, maybe a little bit sinks into them. Because certainly I think even for myself, I may have listened to 50% of what I might have told my younger self. So I think the more that people like me can talk about it, the mental aspect as well, which I talked about in my seminar, I think hopefully that sort of opens up the door where people can reach out to someone like myself or their coaches, do their own research and things like that, so that hopefully the next generation of athletes doesn't put themselves through the same kind of pain that we went through. And certainly that would lead to longevity. And then for myself now, I continue to do sort of additional physical training outside of kendo, just so that I can continue to do kendo in the way that I want to. I think I could just accept and be like, okay, I'm getting older and slower, and that's fine. But for me, I guess because I'm the type of person I am, I still want to continue to perform at a certain level. And so that physical training part of it has certainly been helpful. And also because our lives are so busy, giving yourself that time to think about the mental aspect and like, why am I doing this? Is this bringing value to me? How can I change it? Those type of internal discussions, I think, is really important for young people and older people. And I think it just becomes magnified as you get older because time is more valuable, right? The things that are consuming your time are much more valuable to yourself, and you want the kendo time to be enriching as well.
That's certainly something that I've started to notice is that if you take a traditional training regime, it'd be like, oh, I'm feeling pain, do more kendo. Oh, I'm not strong enough, do more kendo. Oh, I don't have good conditioning, do more kendo. And now we know that there are certain things that are better for other things. Like if you're trying to build core muscles that you need to have stability, then you should do training in that area only. And just doing it within the art itself is probably not enough. So do you have examples of some of these that you find are more and more important, especially as you get older? What are these supplementary activities or things you need to do outside of just the practice?
Yeah. So for the last 5 years or so, 4 years, I've had the opportunity to train with a trainer that's not a kendo trainer, but just physical conditioning trainer. And so he's brought a lot of my weaknesses to light. So I think if you just go to the gym on your own, you don't realize these things. So you kind of make a physical or a mental note of where you are in your physicality, and you work on those things. And there's sort of like the obvious things like in kendo where you might want to work on your calves because we use them a lot to jump off, or we want to work on our arm strength so that we can swing faster or stronger. So there are those things that I think people sort of have in their minds in terms of what they need to work on in kendo. But having the opportunity to work with a trainer, he sort of sees me holistically and tries to develop me in terms of where my weaknesses are, but then also looks at the movements within kendo to find opportunities where I could be stronger. So some of those areas, core, definitely. So when I first started working with him, and it continues to be a struggle, is that my core is quite weak. And he said it's because the movement within Kendo is so lateral, like just back and forth, that we don't actually we don't have to engage our core that much. And then also because the motions are very bursty, that there isn't that sort of extended period of time where we have to be in a sort of a stance, or there's different aspects of that. So my core was very weak. The other thing that he points out quite often is that my body is very unbalanced in terms of the strengths and weaknesses. So one side is much stronger for my upper body than the other side, and then vice versa for the lower body. And that obviously comes from repetitive motion where everything is one-sided, right? He said it's common in basketball players too as well, or tennis players, because they're doing the same swing and the reverse side is sort of a different swing and things like that. So working on those things and realizing that the imbalance is good to a certain level, or the weakness is not going to really impede you to a certain level. But when you're tired, or even just overall you're tired, or like even if you're in a match and you start to get tired, is when you need those additional supporting muscles, or that the capacity that could have come from other muscles that aren't working as hard to kick in and give you that additional strength and stability. And certainly as you get older, your muscles are atrophying, and you need to work to maintain that muscle strength. Another thing that he pointed out, and he said was quite common with women, is that there's it's something called end range strength. So in terms of extension, he says that my body is very good at extending, but then that strength when my arm is extended or my leg is extended, having that strength to do that final push or that final snap, I was lacking that strength. So we work on, very specific exercises where my muscles are extended, and then trying to develop that strength in those smaller muscles at the end. So I would say, those three areas, I mean, they're specific to me, but I imagine that they're common to other Kendo people as well.
The other thing I would like to talk about is transition to being a parent of a kenshi from just being a student.
So as my journey in Kendo progressed, more recently, my kids started Kendo about 1.5 years ago, although this half year has been not in the dojo. But I think that was a transition where I wasn't sure what was going to happen. So certainly I was back in the dojo after I had my kids. It was probably about a 2 or 3 year span there where I was sort of off and on between having kids and sort of taking care of them. But I think I've been very lucky because my husband does do Kendo. I mean, lucky and not lucky, right? Because we both have to be at the dojo at the same time, and we're committed to events that are always the same time. But there's a part of it where we don't have to really compromise, right? Like, I think a lot of compromise needs to be made within a relationship, a marriage where, okay, I'm going to be doing this event, or I'm going to be going to this event. So taking turns with the kids and things like that. Fortunately and unfortunately, when we have events, we both go and we both have responsibilities, and then our kids just end up having to come along with us. So in that respect, I think it's been fairly smooth transitioning back. I didn't actually, before I had kids, I thought that I wouldn't be able to come back for a long time, like after having kids. And where I got that idea, I'm not really sure, but it just seemed like, if I have kids, like, am I going to be able to go Kendo at night? That kind of thought certainly was in my mind. And I probably have to take, 10 years off or whatever now. So when I had the opportunity to go back and going back to Kendo with young children, I think it brought a lot of value to me at that time. Still being able to do the things that I loved, having that interaction with the people that I built friendships with, I think was really valuable. And then so moving forward a few years when my kids started, at first, I wasn't their teacher, so we had taking turns again as instructors, taking on the teaching of certain groups of students. I wasn't their teacher, so they would go and they would be with a different sensei, and that's sort of the end of that. But more recently, I guess last year, I became their group. There's a cohort of about 6 or 7 of them. So I became their instructor for a while there. So it's always challenging. You know, you're harder on your own kids than you are on others, I think, or at least I am. So having to sort of rein myself in a little bit to make sure that I'm being fair to them and that they don't feel like they're being singled out, I think is important. One thing that's sort of stuck with me, there's a caretaker at the rec center we're at, a lovely lady, and she's been there for the last, I would say 4 or 5 years. They sort of rotate once in a while, but she said to me, she says, oh, you have to make sure that on your way home from practice that you give them some space and you give them that time to digest what they've just gone through. She says, make sure that you don't talk about kendo like all the way home. And she said that her husband was a soccer coach, and that's something that they've learned, that the kids need some time to sort of calm their minds and digest, not be constantly bombarded even after practice. So I thought, yeah, that's true, because that used to happen to me on the way home from kendo. My dad used to like put me through the ringer in terms of what I did wrong at practice, but perhaps it would have been nice to like sort of self-reflect a little bit and have that time, that's that safe space. I think she called it a safe space. So I think that's something that I definitely take to heart and try not to talk too much about kendo outside of the dojo.
And how do they seem to be taking it right now?
Well, typical of you know, of kids that age. I don't think they love it, unfortunately. I think my son likes it a little bit more than my daughter, but they feel like it's something they need to do because it's part of our family. And I suppose that's like really heartening for me. Like, that's great that they feel that way, that kendo is a big part of our family and that they're doing something that's our family is committed to. And certainly, I mean, they're so lucky. They have so many friends at the dojo, and even the older kids they've known for so long that they take care of them. And again, also those players that come to stay with us as well, I think it's a great socializing experience for our kids to see those type of people that come and they're like, wow, they're just here to do kendo, is sort of the question that they ask. And you're like, yeah, they want to get strong, and so they're here to practice. And so I think hopefully those are all, I mean, the people that are around us have obviously provided them with a very positive experience. So yeah, I hope it makes them better as people, not just as kendo players.
Okay, I think we're at time. You have another meeting to go to, so thank you so much for doing this.
Absolutely, it was fun. Thank you. Have a good day. Bye.
Hey guys, I hope you enjoyed that episode, because we have a lot more exciting conversations to share as we explore the world of the traditional Japanese martial arts. The Inside Look podcast is available on most common podcasting platforms and on YouTube. Remember to subscribe to not miss out on new interviews as they are posted. We're always looking for feedback to improve, so please write us a review or drop us a line at podcast@tokushikai.ca or on Facebook and Instagram at tokushikai.canada. Until next time, thanks for listening.